Good morning, class. Welcome to Chapter 3, Water-Soluble Vitamins. So hopefully you remember a little bit about the water-soluble vitamins from last time when we did a little bit of intro to vitamins as well as talked about the fat-soluble vitamins. Hopefully you remember that they are excreted in the urine. They're not stored in large amounts. They are very easily destroyed by cooking. For example, steaming or boiling for a very, very long time in water, as well as high temperatures. And there are 8 B vitamins as well as vitamin C. So we will continue with this lecture and learn all about each individual one. Coenzymes. All of the B vitamins function as coenzymes. And coenzymes are small organic molecules that can combine with an inactive enzyme to allow that inactive enzyme to now be in an active state. They function in energy metabolism, so they help with carbohydrate, fat, protein metabolism, as well as the production of ATP. People who are physically active, such as athletes, may need some of these B vitamins in higher amounts due to their more metabolically active tissue. However, usually athletes eat more, so they are able to meet these RDAs. In foods, we find B vitamins as either vitamins or coenzymes, and they're often bound to proteins. When we digest them, when those B vitamins hit our stomach acid, we can separate them from the protein so they can be absorbed across the intestinal wall, where they are then rebound to another protein. Wow, okay. So this picture is looking at coenzyme functions on the left, and it has a very simple diagram of how a vitamin can function to create an active enzyme. So you can see this enzyme has 2 parts, and without the vitamin component, it would not form this active site. This site right here is where what we call a substrate would bind. This on the right is metabolism in a nutshell, and you can see the role of many B vitamins as well as their coenzyme forms here. So for example, NAD, nicotiniamide dinucleotide, PLP, CoA, NADP, TPP, B12, etc. Grains. So why are we talking about grains? I thought we were talking about B vitamins. We're talking about grains because grains are a very important source of the B vitamins. Grains are also a good source of minerals and fiber. And all grains start out awesome. However, processing really just diminishes some of the very beneficial properties of grains. So when we process grains, we remove the germ, the bran, and the husk. And the only thing that is left is the starchy part. We lose vitamins, minerals, and fiber when we process grains. And so what do we do to try to fix this? Starting in the 1940s, we fortified grains. And so we enrich grains by adding back thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid, and iron. I know you guys are going to love this cartoon, but I thought it was funny. I couldn't resist. So when we process grains, even though we enrich them with those vitamins and iron that I just mentioned, they are still a lot lower in some very helpful nutrients, such as B6, potassium, magnesium, zinc, fiber, and phytochemicals. And so this is why it is much more beneficial to be consuming whole grains versus refined grains. This chart is looking at brown rice versus white rice and how much more of certain nutrients brown rice has. For example, this blue is fiber. Brown rice has like 550% more fiber. Yellow is magnesium, over 400% more. Purple is zinc, over 100% more. Orange is B6, about 100% more, and potassium, just under 100%. On the right is whole wheat bread versus white bread. And you can see that whole wheat bread has 200% or more of all of these categories of nutrients when compared to white bread. Why would you even have white rice? So white rice originated in tropical countries where there's a lot of heat. And the problem with the brown rice is the brown rice would actually go rancid quicker than the white rice because of the fat content in the brown rice. And so they started processing rice to extend the shelf life. They thought this was a good thing, and it was as far as shelf life was concerned, but little did they know they were actually stripping that rice of some of the very important nutrients. So we're going to get into the vitamins. We have to start at number 1. B1 is thiamine, and this is the first discovered B vitamin. It helps release energy from carbohydrates. It has a coenzyme form, thiamine pyrophosphate, and it can be very easily destroyed by heat or alkaline conditions. Where do we get thiamine? In our foods. We can actually find thiamine in quite a few foods. It's in sunflower seeds, in rich cereals, some vegetables, some protein products, and most men and women do meet the RDAs. There is no upper limit for thiamine. Excuse me. There is no upper limit for thiamine because it's easily excreted in our urine. Sometimes people are low in thiamine if they have diets that are very processed. They're eating a lot of just white sugars and fried things, Coca-Colas, etc., or potentially in alcoholics. Functions of thiamine. So thiamine forms this very important enzyme, thiamine pyrophosphate, or TPP, and this is needed for the metabolism of carbs and BCAAs, which hopefully you remember are the branched chain amino acids. It also functions as a coenzyme that's needed for DNA and RNA synthesis, and it's needed by the nervous system. Remember that our nervous system relies on glucose for energy, and thiamine is needed to convert pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, which is an absolutely essential step in metabolism. If we have a thiamine deficiency, we can't convert pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, and we won't be able to metabolize glucose. So thiamine is absolutely essential. Thiamine deficiency is characterized by something called beriberi, and beriberi means I can't in Sri Lanka. This is often seen in Sri Lanka due to high intakes of processed rice or polished white rice. There are many symptoms to beriberi. They include neuropathy, that is muscle weakness, muscle pain, tenderness, enlargement of the heart, edema, anorexia, weight loss, poor memory, and confusion. And there is dry beriberi and wet beriberi. Dry beriberi includes symptoms that are related to the nervous and muscular system, and wet beriberi includes symptoms related to the cardiovascular system. It is also possible to develop infantile beriberi in young babies who are getting inadequate thiamine, potentially through breastfeeding if mom is inadequate. Beriberi is a very significant disease in our history. In the 1800s, 25 to 40% of Japanese in the Navy actually suffered from beriberi, and it continues to be seen in areas where they eat diets very high in polished rice. Symptoms of deficiency can develop very quickly, as fast as 10 days. And I already mentioned that alcoholics are at risk for thiamine deficiency. This is because, 1, they generally have poor diets, and 2, the absorption and use of thiamine are diminished, as well as the excretion is increased in alcoholism. Alcoholics can actually develop a psychosis, and almost like a dementia, and it's called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, and this is due to long-term thiamine deficiency. So Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, like I said, this is the thiamine deficiency seen in alcoholics, and this causes visual disturbances, confusion, and even eye symptoms. It can develop very rapidly. Riboflavin. So our next B vitamin, B2. Riboflavin usually goes by the name riboflavin versus B2. We will learn about some B vitamins that go by their number versus their name. The word riboflavin comes from the Latin word flavus, which means yellow. And so obviously riboflavin is going to be a very yellow kind of component. And riboflavin plays a very important role in coenzymes, FAD and FMN, as well as an antioxidant. Riboflavin is destroyed very easily. It can be destroyed by exposure to light. And so here is a picture of milk. And when you buy your milk, you notice it's either in a cardboard or an opaque container. And that's because milk is actually a very good source of riboflavin. But if it wasn't protected in this cardboard or opaque container, the riboflavin would be destroyed once it was exposed to light. On average, Americans do meet the RDA for riboflavin. There is no upper limit, and supplements don't harm us, but they're excreted in the urine and can cause our urine to look kind of a bright yellow color. Functions of riboflavin. So riboflavin plays very important roles in these coenzymes, and specifically FMN, which is flavin mononucleotide, and FAD, flavin adenine dinucleotide. It also plays a role in FADH2, which is the reduced form of that. It helps with formation of other B vitamins. Niacin can be formed from tryptophan. Folate metabolite and B6 coenzymes require riboflavin for their function. And it helps as an antioxidant by helping to synthesize glutathione peroxidase, which is a very strong antioxidant. Deficiency of riboflavin. Deficiency of riboflavin is called ariboflavonosis, and it affects the mouth, the skin, and the red blood cells. It can cause glossitis, which is a swollen, inflamed tongue. It can cause mouth ulcers. It can cause angular chelosis, which you see on the far right. This is wounds. That is not what I meant to do. This is wounds on the corners of your mouth. These wounds can also happen on the corners of your eye. It will develop potentially after 2 months on a riboflavin poor diet, and likely you would see these deficiency symptoms in combination with other B vitamin deficiency symptoms. It is rare, however, sometimes this develops in elderly or even teenagers. Niacin, B3. So niacin helps form nicotinic acid and nicotinamide, and it's needed for generation of ATP by burning fats and carbohydrates. And it became a major problem in the Southeast U.S. in the late 1800s and persisted all the way until the 1930s, where they saw epidemic proportions of niacin deficiency. Like I said, niacin exists in two forms, nicotinamide and nicotinic acid. Both forms help synthesize the coenzymes NAD+ and NADP+. And we can get this from food sources as well as can synthesize it from tryptophan. We need 60 milligrams of tryptophan to make 1 milligram of niacin. And to convert tryptophan to niacin, we also need the vitamins riboflavin and B6. Sources of niacin. So dietary requirements for niacin are expressed in these niacin equivalents, or NE, and this accounts for the indirect and direct sources. Direct meaning from food and indirect meaning synthesizing from tryptophan. Niacin is very high in protein-rich foods, mushrooms, peanuts, a little bit of potatoes, and some whole grain products. Functions of niacin. So here you see NAD and NADH, and that is the coenzyme form of niacin. You can see here it is participating in the conversion of glucose to pyruvate, pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, as well as the citric acid cycle. And niacin functions in about 200 reactions in metabolism, all of those which help to produce ATP, so it is absolutely crucial for our bodies. Niacin deficiency. Niacin deficiency, because it functions in so many pathways, over 200 pathways, when you have niacin deficiency, the symptoms are very widespread. You can have poor appetite, weight loss, weakness, something called pellagra can develop, which includes the 4 Ds. Sometimes there's even a 5D. This can cause dermatitis. That is skin inflammation, rough red rash on the skin, back of hands, and the face, diarrhea, dementia, and death can even occur. Pellagra, like I mentioned, happened between the 1800s to the 1930s in epidemic proportions. And pellagra sometimes happens in populations that consume corn-based diets if they have not soaked that corn in an alkaline solution. Soaking the corn in an alkaline solution actually helps create that niacin in a way that we can absorb it. But if it's not soaked, we cannot access the niacin in corn. Pharmacological uses of niacin. Niacin can be used to help increase HDL and decrease triglycerides circulating in our bloodstream. However, it does have some side effects. Here you can see this woman has kind of a red face. This is called a niacin flush, and it can also cause upsets of the GI tract as well as the liver. Pantothenic acid, B5. So pantothenic acid plays a very important role as part of coenzyme A or CoA. Recommendations and sources for pantothenic acid. Pantothenic acid is actually very, very widespread in foods, and on average we consume much more than the AI. It's found in sunflowers, raisin bran, milk, yogurt, sausage, fish, avocado, sprouts, turkey, trout, etc. I mentioned it was needed for acetyl-CoA synthesis. It's also important to form fatty acids. Here at the bottom, you can see this is a molecule of acetyl-CoA, and you have this acetyl group on the left side, and then right here, you have pantothenic acid in the middle. So we would not be able to form acetyl-CoA without pantothenic acid. Luckily, pantothenic acid is found in so many foods that we generally get plenty of this. Biotin. So biotin is another B vitamin that also plays a role as a coenzyme. We can get biotin from food sources. There's some food sources listed here, and bacteria in our large intestine can actually synthesize biotin for us. We generally meet the needs for biotin. The needs here are kind of interesting because you might note that the daily value is 10 times more than the adequate intake levels. And some researchers say that this very high daily value is actually kind of outdated and we should reconsider what the daily value should be. However, since biotin is relatively non-toxic, it's not a serious concern. Functions and deficiency. So, functions as a coenzyme, of course it does because it is a B vitamin. It helps convert pyruvate to oxaloacetate. Remember, that is an important part of the citric acid cycle. It can also help DNA fold, and deficiency is very rare. There are some genetic deficiencies where people cannot break it down and metabolize it, but this is pretty rare. B6. So B6 is a vitamin that is known by its number versus its name. However, its name is pyridoxine, and it's actually a family of 3 compounds that, of course, function as coenzymes in over 100 metabolic reactions. Sources of B6 in foods. There's a picture of potato here. It is found in potatoes. It's found in meat, fish, poultry, whole grains, avocado. However, it is very easily destroyed by heat and processing. On average, in the United States, our consumption does exceed the RDA. There is an upper limit, and very high intakes of this potentially could cause nerve damage. Functions. So it is part of the enzyme PLP, or pyridoxal phosphate, and this plays a role in the metabolism of amino acids, folate, and glucose. PLP also plays a role in heme synthesis, neurotransmitter synthesis, such as serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and GABA, and histamine synthesis. B6 deficiency is pretty rare. However, it could occur, and low levels of B6 have been observed in people who had cardiovascular disease, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, or even rheumatoid arthritis. It can cause this skin condition called seborrheic dermatitis, as you can see here, and it's kind of this flaky crustiness of the skin. It can also cause a microcytic hypochromic anemia, which means the cells would be small and pale. It can cause convulsion, depression, and confusion. And the symptoms are so widespread because it functions in those 100 metabolic reactions. Alcoholics may have low levels of this vitamin. Folate. Folate comes from the Latin word for leaf, and when I tried to remember folate, I always think of the foliage, because folate is found in many green leafy vegetables. The term folate itself is a generic name, and that actually refers to various forms of the vitamin that are found naturally in foods. Folic acid is a synthetic form found in supplements and added to foods. So I mentioned folate versus folic acid. Folate can be destroyed by processing in prep. It's susceptible to heat, oxidation, UV light, and as much of 90% of the folate can actually be destroyed by these processes. So it can be good to eat some of these vegetables very lightly cooked or even fresh or raw at times. The RDA for folate is expressed in dietary folate equivalents, or DFEs, and this accounts for the difference in absorption of food folate and synthetic folate. We actually will absorb the most folic acid when we have an empty stomach. So 1 DFE is equivalent to 0.5 micrograms of folic acid if we're taking it on an empty stomach, 0.6 micrograms folic acid if we're taking it with food, and 1 microgram of just a food source of folic acid. So we actually absorb more from this synthetic form. There is an upper limit to folate. It is 1,000. And the reason for the upper limit is that levels higher than this may mask a B12 deficiency. So folate functions in many enzymes and coenzymes, and it helps transfer single carbon groups between these molecules. It's very important for DNA synthesis and repair, and in cases of folate deficiency, DNA synthesis and repair actually slow down. It's interesting, there is a chemotherapeutic drug called methotrexate, and it works by actually inhibiting folate metabolism. And this causes DNA synthesis to slow down. It will target rapidly dividing cells, which include cancer cells, but it can also target rapidly dividing cells such as epithelial cells, mucus cells, cells lining our gastrointestinal tract. So there are some significant side effects. Folate is also needed for formation of neurotransmitters, similar ones that we've heard of before, but serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And it helps maintain normal blood pressure and may reduce the risk of colon cancer. Folate deficiency. So before we started fortifying foods with folate in the United States, about 30% of the population was actually folate deficient. Currently, there is probably less than 1% of the population who's folate deficient, and this 1% includes alcoholics, people with GI conditions or malabsorption, or people who are potentially eating very, very poor, nutrient-poor diets. I mentioned that folate is involved in DNA synthesis, and cells that are rapidly dividing are most affected. So, for example, red blood cells, these are needed to transport oxygen. Red blood cells are made in the bone marrow. However, in folate deficiency, there is not enough folate to make this DNA. However, RNA continues to be produced, and the cells grow very large and immature, and sometimes can't even leave the bone marrow. GI cells are gastrointestinal cells, and when they suffer from folate deficiency, it can lead to malabsorption and diarrhea. And then WBCs are white blood cells, which obviously would lead to decreased immune function. Neural tube defects. So folate is actually or absolutely crucial to the formation of the neural tube. And the neural tube is the structure that forms the brain, spinal cord, spinal nerves, and spinal column. And this is developing prenatal or during pregnancy, the first 21 to 28 days of pregnancy. The developing fetus is forming its neural tube. And so if folate deficiency occurs during this very crucial time period, the infant can suffer from malformations in its spinal cord, brain, spinal column, or nervous system. It can lead to spina bifida, where the backbones don't form a complete ring protecting the spine. It can lead to anencephaly, meaning open brain, lack of skull, or even absence of brain. It can lead to encephalocele, where the brain is protruding through the skull hasn't formed all the way. And it can also lead to cleft lip, cleft palate, and heart defects. Oh, I didn't realize these were here. So these are pictures of babies who had neural tube defects, primarily cleft palate and cleft lip. Some of them are very severe. I actually took these pictures myself. I traveled down to Mexico in, I believe, 2011, a town called La Piedad with Doctors Without Borders, and I didn't assist in the surgery, but I assisted in some of the prep for the surgery as well as the outpatient care for these families, and they were able to come to the clinic for free and have free surgery to fix these very, very, I don't know how to say this, but these very devastating malformations. The malformations not only are physical, as in you can see them, there's an appearance of them, but they actually can cause many functional issues, such as the infant being able to develop speech, the infant being able to swallow appropriately, and the infant being able to eat foods, even breathe through the nose. So they're very, very important too, that these infants got the care that they did. This is just during the surgeries and me. B12. So B12. B12 is an interesting vitamin. It's the only vitamin that contains a mineral part of its structure. So it has cobalt as part of its structure. And B12 is also unique because we can store it in the liver. Actually, quite a few years worth of B12 can be stored in the liver. So that's something that separates it from many of the other B vitamins. We get B12 from animal sources or fortified foods. An additional source of B12 is nutritional yeast. So plants do not make B12. Vegans need to get B12 through supplements or from nutritional yeast. And I put some videos about nutritional yeast here in case you haven't heard of it. If you exclude vegans and vegetarians from the population, the average US population gets 2 times more than the RDA. So we're getting plenty of this. And we can store it in the liver, have enough to last about 2 to 3 years. Deficiency won't develop to potentially even up to 20 years. Elderly adults are sometimes deficient, and we're going to get into this a little bit later. Okay, so the absorption and digestion of B12 is actually pretty complicated and relies on many different organ systems working appropriately. So digestion actually starts, well, it doesn't start in the salivary glands, but the salivary glands produce a compound called R protein, which is vital to the digestion and absorption of B12. R protein then travels to the stomach with B12. B12 is bound to proteins in foods, and so hydrochloric acid is needed to separate that B12 from proteins. The free B12 can then bind with this thing called R protein that the salivary glands have created. And also in the stomach, we have parietal cells. Those will be secreting something very important called intrinsic factor. B12, R protein, and intrinsic factor will all be move through the stomach into the small intestine. In the small intestine, the pancreas will secrete trypsin, which can separate B12 from the R protein. B12 will then bind with intrinsic factor, and it can be absorbed in the ileum, where it will travel to the liver. If somebody is B12 deficient, they can get B12 injections, which will bypass this system. They can actually take a nasal spray of B12, which will also bypass it, or they can take very, very high amounts of supplements, like 300 times the RDA. And in the case that they take those very highly concentrated supplements, B12 will be absorbed via diffusion instead of needing the intrinsic factor, etc. Why is it important? So, of course, it is a coenzyme. It's important for the formation of methionine from homocysteine. In deficiency of B12, homocysteine builds up, and high homocysteine levels have been associated with stroke, cardiovascular disease. It's important for fatty acid metabolism. It helps protect the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is a component that insulates neurons and helps protect neurons. And so that being said, in deficiency, neurological symptoms can develop, and it is absolutely vital for folate metabolism. So it's needed to convert folate coenzymes to their active form so that folate can be active in DNA synthesis. Deficiency. Deficiency can cause something called pernicious anemia. And pernicious anemia comes from the words that mean leading to death. This is a macrocytic anemia, meaning the cells will be large, and it is associated with nerve degeneration, weakness, paralysis, and sore mouth. About 2% of older adults do suffer from pernicious anemia, and it's usually due to abnormalities in intrinsic factor formation, as well as potentially inadequate stomach acid. And so elderly often have trouble separating B12 from protein, as well as producing enough intrinsic factor for B12 absorption. Elderly commonly suffer from something called atrophic gastritis, which is an overgrowth of bacteria in their stomach and intestinal tract. And this overgrowth of bacteria can reduce their ability to secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. So who is at risk of deficiency? Elderly. I just mentioned that. Anybody with malabsorption, vegetarians and vegans if they're not consuming enough, and infants of vegetarian and vegan mamas who are breastfed. Vegetarian and vegan mamas who are breastfeeding their infants need to take caution to make sure that they take a B12 supplement so that B12 can be passed to their baby. Choline. So choline is interesting. Choline is not considered a B vitamin because it doesn't have a coenzyme function. But in 1998, the Institute of Medicine did recognize choline as something essential for health and an essential nutrient. And we do have very high amounts of choline in our body. That's another reason that it's kind of different from the normal B vitamins. But our synthesis of choline can still be insufficient to meet needs. Sources of choline. So we can get this from animal foods, nuts, grains, fruits, and veggies, and it can be made in our body. The process to make it in our body involves folate and methionine, and so that can contribute to our choline status. However, it's estimated that only 10% of Americans meet their adequate intakes for choline. So it's very, very likely that we are deficient in choline. You can see that eggs are a good source, milk, yogurt, apples, oranges, whole wheat, but none of these are even close to meeting the AI. I guess if you had 2 or 3 eggs a day, you might get there. But it's not that high in food sources. There is a upper limit for choline, and the adequate intake levels for choline are higher during pregnancy because it's needed for the developing baby. Choline is important in phospholipids. Remember, phospholipids make up the structure of cell membranes. It is a precursor for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that plays an important role in muscle control, learning, memory, and attention. And it is a source of methyl groups, which are CH3 groups. Vitamin C. So vitamin C is not a B vitamin, but it is a water-soluble vitamin. And vitamin C is associated with a deficiency disease called scurvy that historically affected British sailors and soldiers during the Civil War. When these sailors were at long sea voyages, they quickly ran out of fresh fruits and vegetables and didn't have any other sources of vitamin C. And so scurvy developed on these multiple month-long voyages. Where can we get vitamin C? Vitamin C is found in citrus and really in any bright colored fruits and vegetables. It's also added to cereals. It is the least stable vitamin and can be destroyed by heat, iron, copper, oxygen, or water. So if we're boiling foods, vitamin C can be destroyed. Normal cooking reduces vitamin C levels by about 40%. Tobacco users need more vitamin C because vitamin C has some roles as an antioxidant, and tobacco users are exposed to many oxidizing agents. There is an upper level for vitamin C, and high doses of vitamin C can cause nausea, gastrointestinal distress, can lead to kidney stones, or potentially interfere with blood tests for diabetes or blood in the stool. Functions of vitamin C. So vitamin C's most notable role is that with collagen synthesis, and collagen is a connective tissue found in bone, teeth, tendons, and our blood vessels. Vitamin C is also involved in wound healing as an antioxidant, like I already mentioned. Vitamin C actually helps reactivate vitamin E, which hopefully you remember vitamin E is a potent antioxidant. Vitamin E enhances non-heme iron absorption and is crucial to the immune system. This picture is vitamin E, and you can see that vitamin E helps add OH groups, oxygen and hydrogen groups, or hydroxyl groups, to the amino acids proline and lysine, which help stabilize collagen fibers. More roles. Vitamin C may play a role in cancer, and we're going to investigate that coming up. Scurvy. So when you have vitamin C deficiency, you cannot synthesize collagen. So bones, teeth, vessels, tendons, ligaments, any of that stuff. And some of the symptoms include fatigue, hemorrhages, which is bleeding, gums and joint bleeding, impaired wound healing, bone pain, fractures, diarrhea, depression, and this can even be fatal if untreated. So during the times of these long sea voyages, many sailors died at sea specifically from scurvy. So this is the potential role in cancer and heart disease. There is some evidence that vitamin C may reduce risk of mouth, esophagus, stomach, and lung cancer and may protect against heart disease. Linus Pauling was a very famous scientist and researcher who actually lived locally in the central coast of California and founded the Linus Pauling Institute. And he dedicated the last half of his life to studying vitamin C, and he believed that we need vitamin C in very, very high amounts, and much of his work was controversial, although he was a Nobel Prize recipient. So this is a quite interesting video about his work and vitamin C and the controversy surrounding it. Vitamin C above the RDA. So many people believe that if they take these super physiologic amounts of vitamin C or very high levels of vitamin C, it will prevent them from getting sick. It will prevent colds. It will prevent flu. And that is absolutely not true. Unfortunately, vitamin C does not prevent the flu or the cold. However, if you take high levels of vitamin C, it may reduce your cold symptoms by about 1 day, but this does not happen for everybody. Vitamin-like compounds. So you can read more about these in your book if you would like. These are compounds that function similarly to vitamins, however, aren't classified as vitamins because, as you can see, they're amino acids, and they help maintain normal metabolism, and they're not considered essential. Tips for preserving vitamins in fruits and veggies. So we discussed that pretty much all of these B vitamins, as well as the vitamin C, are water soluble and are easily destroyed by heat, oxygen, iron, and alkaline materials potentially. And so these are some tips for keeping your vitamins and minerals in their highest possible concentrations in food sources that you buy. And I believe this concludes our lecture. So I hope you learned a lot about vitamins today, and I will see you next time.